Hey, welcome everybody. We are here today with Trinity Vandenacre. This is the Profitable Steward podcast. My name is Jared Sorensen. It's an honor to be the host of this podcast. Each and every podcast we have somebody who has a unique story, has a unique come from. Generally, we talk about stewardship, regeneration, building a legacy business, um, and striving to honor the gifts and talents God's blessed us with and given us to serve our fellow man. So, Trinity, why don't you let folks know who you are, where you're from, and kind of what got you to the point of being an influencer in social media?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things, some people have certain gifts and some people have other gifts, and my experience has taught me a lot about myself in this industry just by growing up. My parents were farmers in Conrad, Montana. Lost their farm in the 80s when I was a kid, and then my dad sold insurance actually to get back into the ag industry, but he chose to go with horse leasing because there was more of a tourism aspect to that. And so he started that business, and I grew up in that and took over a lot of responsibility of that business at 18 because he had a traumatic brain injury. So he was kind of completely out of commission for about 17 years. But so during that, you got a lot of aspects of agriculture, land use, also with how hunters and outfitters interact with public lands and how they view ranchers at the same time. I was working for ranchers to cover extra income because nothing, So I've been sitting on that tractor out in the field, praying to God, how the heck am I going to make this work? If I get a flat
Right.
tire in my vehicle, where's that money going to come from?
Yeah.
Seeing that the only money you can actually make at certain times, it looks like anyway, is if I sell this land to a developer, because I can't sell it to somebody who's ag related. They don't have enough money to do that. So those kind of things kind of set me up to where I was like, I got to get out of this to get back in it. That was my thought process. I got to go make
Hmm.
money somewhere else to get back into agriculture. And I discovered that I have the ability to speak, which I never knew.
Huh.
Um, you know, Public speaking is something that people are terrified of, right? I kind of thrive on it. So I was like, well, that's something I can do. Being out of it for several years, I started building houses and selling them. I'm like, this is where profit is made. So I understood that profit comes from a lot more profit. Okay, it may be a different kind of risk, but it's a faster profit for land. So all of that combined showed me the devastating effects that I see all surrounding agriculture, and the very people who supply our food are dealing with all of these aspects, that their land is worth more when they sell it, right? The way that they can really make a massive profit is to stop being in business, which
Hmm.
is horrible for the country, the future of our country. And then when you start delving into all the other aspects, the fact that hunters who actually rely on what ranchers do to feed wildlife for them to go out and do these things, see cows. I saw the aspects of hunters looking at cattle on public land as a negative, and the way that they kind of have this back and forth with landowners, and they really should be on the same side. All of these
Hmm.
aspects brought me to the course of action that I've been doing, which is, you know, I, social media is a way that I can reach people and teach them about where their food comes from, why it's important that we don't lose our independent ranchers and farmers, because they are literally the lifeblood of our country
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
and so that's what led me to do this.
That's awesome. When did you get started? When did you publish your first video or your first post that was like, hey, I'm going to put my voice out there?
Man, several years ago, it must be, you know I'm terrible with timeline.
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago. Well, social media is the way of the future, right? It's way. And because that's what I want to do, is reach people. This is an aspect of that. I'm going to play around with it and see what I can do. So I made videos about what our family did, camping, you know, hiking, things like that, and discovered lots of things that don't work. Lots of hard things with cameras and what you can do and what you can't do, and the uncomfortableness of a lot of it. And then took those a little bit of that knowledge and then started making videos a little bit better production, not necessarily quality wise, but understanding what I was actually trying to target about
Hmm.
2.5 years ago. And on YouTube, that's where I started. So
Okay. Okay. Perfect. And now you're up to like 300,000 followers, it looks like, on YouTube, TikTok. I don't know other platforms, but you know,
almost. I'm at like 299,900 on YouTube. So you're not
okay.
quite there.
Not
Um,
quite there. Okay.
no. And then I have a Facebook page following. So it's probably around 800,000 total
Cool.
on
Yeah.
all platforms.
Yeah.
It was more, and then I got hacked. Somebody hacked my laptop, and I lost 285,000 followers on Facebook.
Okay.
Completely. That was nice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah, learned some things there.
right.
Hmm.
Right. Um, well, that's pretty amazing. So in 2.5 years, you've really been able to grow your message and grow a following. A lot of questions around that. So why don't we go down that vein first, and then let's talk about the challenges to ranching. And the reason I want to go down this vein is because so many of our listeners and people that attend our summits come to our classes and work with us one-on-one, are wanting to sell or already are selling direct to consumer. And part of that, we encourage them to share a unique message, to be able to find their voice and share that. It's not so much about the best product. I have no doubt that our family raises the best grass-fed beef in the world, and other people do also. So we can't say that it's our product. There has to be something else that differentiates us. And so, Trinity, when you started publishing things, did you know right off, okay, this is my core message? Or how did you come to that? That like, okay, this is what I need to share
Yeah.
and what resonates.
Interestingly, so I didn't know that. And, I just started making content to show people what ranching is really like. But I think there's a huge disconnect with what people think ranching is. And, you guys are all rich. Everybody that does ranching is filthy rich. I mean, obviously, because they drive a
Sure,
new
sure.
pickup. That's always if you drive a
Yeah.
new pickup, obviously you're rich. So, and so I was trying to just combat the mentality. Here's what we do. Here's why we brand. Here's why you give a shot to a calf. You don't want to give a shot to every calf. You do it for a purpose, kind of a thing. So to combat those things, I discovered that there's a huge amount of people out there in cities who actually want who are not totally against ranching. They don't think cows are bad. They just don't have a clue how it actually works.
Mhm.
So reaching them with that message is huge. Now, do I think that that is exactly what you should do when you're trying to sell beef to a customer? That is probably not. I'm dealing more with the aspects of, you know, what is hindering ranching and trying to educate people on that so they can understand, what they vote for matters, right? What is important. And I think what I've found is there's a few pillars that I stand on now, which is family values of rural communities
Mhm.
and the small community aspects of that. I think that's a good place to go. The made in America beef aspect is a really good way to go. The community aspect, though, I think is something that people really have a connection to. So if you're selling beef to locally, this is something that is like a foreign concept in our country right now, as you well know. So it's almost and people don't understand why you're not selling it for cheaper when you're selling direct.
Mhm.
So that's something you kind of have to overcome is to explain to them, well, I can't compete with somebody who can import beef, right? From other countries and then disperse their costs over 4,000 head a day.
Right.
Right? Those types of things you have to overcome. I think the quality is better. I mean, if you're here in the United States, the way we raise cattle and the way we handle cattle, especially on a small scale, is definitely higher quality, better tasting beef than a lot of the stuff that's even raised here and goes through the big commercial system.
Mhm.
You know, when you're trying to put pounds on a calf or an animal extremely fast, because every day matters in profit for a big corporation, the feed and everything that they put into them and the hormones and all that kind of stuff, you end up with an inferior product, but it's cheaper.
Mhm.
So you can stand in many ways, I believe, on the quality of the product.
Yeah.
But then the community aspect and the environmental impact aspect is big too.
Okay. So
As you
leverage,
well,
yeah,
go ahead.
leveraging the quality, but also what things matter to the consumer. Um, and so back to you, and then let's tie it into somebody who's selling D2C. Um, who is your target audience, and what matters to them?
Right, and that's a big deal because most people, I'm sometimes I try to figure out what my target audience is. The audience I want to target is people in the cities who have a desire, who actually do understand maybe a smidgen of the importance of independent ranchers and ag producers,
Hmm.
and they want to support that. And then the people that think they want this lifestyle, so that helping them understand what that actually entails, right? That
Yeah,
don't move to your area and then get mad at everybody for having cows. That kind of mentality. So that's my target audience.
got it.
And I
Got it.
believe that's probably the target audience of many people who want to sell direct beef as well. I think it kind of depends on where you're at though to sell beef direct. Right.
Mhm.
Location matters because in Montana we barely have a city that's big enough to sell to. So selling beef direct is like you got five ranchers and they're all trying to sell to the same person. That's gets more difficult.
Sure.
There's still a market there, but it's if you're next to any or within striking distance of any cities, that's something to promote, that you can deliver to those cities.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and if you look at the industrial system, the way that it's set up, we certainly saw some frailties in that during COVID.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and there are some things that we can provide as independent local ranchers, but there's also an aspect that the system's not quite there yet to support that. I remember sitting in Sunday school once, and somebody made the comment, "If we switch to grass fed, the world would starve." And I kind of bowed up and wanted to argue, and I thought, well, Sunday school is probably not the best place to do this, first of all. But later I realized, you know what? They're absolutely right. We don't have the infrastructure to be able to support a full on local food system, because we don't have the distribution, we don't have the processing, we don't have people who know how to do grass fed at scale. We've lost those skills, and they're coming back, and grateful for the great people like Alan Williams and Understanding Ag and Joel Salatin and many others who have paved the way that, like, hey, it can be done, and actually it can be done at scale, but we're not there yet. So in this interim, Trinity, what do you see as the from let's look at it from the producer side first. What do we do? I listened last night on my drive your interview with Mike Calicrate, and he's
Hmm.
a great advocate for local. And
Hmm.
but the fact of the matter is, can we on these big ranches market sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of head direct to consumer? Probably not, right? So as a
Right.
producer, what do we do now if we're committed to selling direct to consumer, committed to regeneration? We know we have a good product. Um, what in your opinion, and also what you see from other people that's working? Where do we start, and how do we begin to scale that?
Yeah, so this is the big question, right? If you have even 500 head of cows or 300 head of cows, I mean, you're talking that is a ton of beef. So
Yeah.
you're not. I think a lot of people, or some people, try to think of this marketing direct as like I'm just going to take my whole herd and just market it direct, but we've kind of destroyed what you're alluding to is we've destroyed the local systems in our country to the point where they don't exist anymore. So how do we break into that again? And I just want to make one thing clear when you're talking about we need processors and we need the one thing that's a problem. I think we have a lot of new processors coming online that are probably going to completely go broke. And I hate to say that,
Yeah.
but because we're focused on the big packers as the problem, they are a huge problem, but they're not the problem, not the only problem. The major problem is the access to the market.
Mhm.
You it doesn't matter how many local processors we have if they don't have anywhere to sell their beef to, if they can't if they can't have a retail outlet, that's where our problem lies. Because you can butcher 9,000 cows a day, it doesn't matter if you don't have anywhere to sell them.
Yep.
It doesn't matter how many. So the USDA put a lot of grant money towards small packing plants, but we haven't figured out the way to distribute the meat from the packing plant to stores because we have chain stores that are so large that I see that as one of the major issues. So unless we get we enforce the laws that are on the books, which should be enforced, where we don't have companies that completely run the entire industry, where local producers can't access Walmart. You can't sell to Walmart, right?
Mhm.
Because you don't have enough volume. So you have to figure out ways to sell directly to local. So if I was going to start local, I would start very small, right? If you can, it's like I don't know if you know who Marbled Meats is in Billings, Montana.
Mhm.
Um, Fantastic guy over there, and he said if you can't make money on 3 head, it doesn't matter how many head you butcher. Right.
Okay.
You have to
Right.
learn how to make money on 3 head before you can move up to 5 head, before you can move up to 20 head. So if
Yeah.
I was going to move into selling direct to customer, that's where I would go. I would butcher a couple, right?
Yeah.
Figure out how to sell them because that is your barrier. People think the barrier is getting them butchered, but that's only one barrier. Having a meat locker full of 20 beef doesn't help you, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So figuring out how to retail to that customer. I think it I don't do it myself. I don't butcher beef and sell to customer because I have a I have a I help people. I promote people who do this. So I don't
Yeah.
really want to become their competition right off the bat here to either. But
Sure.
I think that there's a market there for that, especially where the populations are large. I think people really, really want this local beef product. But figuring that marketing aspect out, how to sell that directly. And then to answer a question, I am trying to figure this out as I interview more and more people and discover and delve into it. How do you compete with? How do we as independent ranchers, right? How do they compete with Cisco?
Yeah.
You can't compete with Cisco. So we have to figure out a different way to market our product or get our product to the customer. So there's an outfit here in Montana who is they're actually building restaurants to market their own beef to because to sell to a restaurant, Cisco's got that tied up, right?
Right.
Um, Literally, I looked it up yesterday. Cisco makes 105% profit on return on equity every year.
Huh.
Now, if we could how do you compete with a profit margin of 105% a year? That means if you put in your entire equity, that means you would, like in your case, whatever your ranch is worth, you would make that plus 5% in
Every
net
year.
profit. That's not gross, that's net.
Yeah.
So the barriers, those are the barriers. And when your profit margins are what they are in what you do, how do you compete with that?
Yeah.
That's the real question, is the retail aspect of it. Breaking into those schools. Schools should be buying local meat, not
Hmm.
Brazilian meat. I mean, I love my Brazilian counterparts, that raise beef, but I'm all for American first. I mean, and we should be putting that meat in schools.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely. Absolutely. I absolutely agree, and I think you're on the right track there. There are some huge barriers to entry when you are selling direct to consumer and wanting to figure out the marketing, the processing and fulfillment, shipping, delivery, customer
mhm.
service. A lot of the reasons that we get into ranching is because we're not people, right?
No,
And then
well,
all of
or
a sudden,
marketing people, right?
our market, yeah, and so all of a sudden we're like, well, hey, this guy's knocking it out of the park, doing great things, and so I need to get a piece of that, and I want to start my own D2C company. Um, there are people that are doing it, and they're doing it well,
Mhm.
and they're doing it at scale. There have been a lot of others who have tried and failed and learned lessons, and are now retrying, retooling. And do you know of anybody who has like a system that's like, from your perspective, is really working, that's scalable, and that is above all profitable?
So the Mannix Ranch here,
Yeah.
in they're they're doing something that's pretty unique, and I think that is something. I don't know how to scale that. I mean, they're doing a pretty huge operation, um, because they have a lot of kids,
Hmm.
and one of them, is very, very good at business. So he was able to take on the aspect of being a businessman, setting up the companies to, where do you outlet this beef to
Yeah.
your own restaurants. He's
Is
got,
that Cole?
yeah,
Yeah.
Cole. And so I think when you're looking at this, you really have to consider. That's why I try to not go completely against the commercial system, because there may not be, in a lot of ways, access for everybody to do this unless we set up local systems. We really need businessmen who, instead of wanting to make 105% profit, they set up local retail systems for ranchers to sell to. That's what we're lacking in the entire system.
Mhm.
Are ranchers going to be responsible for this? No. I mean, I don't know how I would ranch and do what I do.
Yeah.
So this is a full-time, more than a full-time job, what I do. And I don't even make any money at it. I mean, I barely make enough to keep going because I chose to stand up for people who don't have the money, right?
Okay.
If I want to
Hmm.
promote Cargill, I'd probably get paid very well, right? But I'm standing up for people who can't even hardly make it in their own business. So that's a difficult thing. We really need retail systems that are willing to say, I'm going to only promote uh, local. And
Yeah.
I think that might be coming, but there's going to have to be incentives in place for that. That's really what needs to be incentivized. There's another aspect to this that I think ranchers really need to, a couple things that ranchers need to understand about promoting their products, though. And that's is we need to get on the bandwagon of environmentalism. You and I are actually more environmental stewards, or even maybe activists, than most environmental groups, because they've all been completely hijacked the word conservation to mean something that it doesn't mean at all. And it's become profit machines against ranchers, especially on public land, uses of public land. And that is something that I find astounding to me. But one of the problems with ranchers that you mentioned is they're quiet. They're quiet, and I understand why they're quiet. they have a job to do that takes 24/7, right? It's when how many people can be consumed by a 24/7 job and still have the mental energy to try to fight what's going on around them? Right. What's happening is we're a minority already, and then we have this enormously large audience with that are sitting in watching social media, right, and hearing how bad cows are for the environment. And that's the truth. It's not, but that's not evident because what's taught is that, you know, it, well, hunters, even when they go hunting and they see cows, have grazed off an area, they're like, oh man, the elk would just be running all over here if they wasn't cows, not understanding at all the positivity, the actual uh, positive effect that cattle have on wildlife populations and where they graze and all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
that's not something that every rancher can fight, but ranchers isolate themselves in a couple of different ways. So I would encourage this. You may not be able to combat all this stuff on social media, but when I go somewhere, a lot of times I will hear, oh, don't talk to this person because he wasn't raised a rancher.
Huh.
He just got into it a couple years ago. And I'm like, you guys are alienating the people who want to get into this industry. So you got to be very careful with like, and we're all like that. We're humans. Hunters are that way. Like, I don't want to tell anybody where this area is. What are you hunting in my area for? It's a don't come to Montana. That's we're all humans. We all think that same way, but we have to understand that alienating everybody because we've done it this way for 100 years doesn't help our cause. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hear
Yeah.
that all the time on social media. It's like, well, ranchers did this to me and ranchers did that to me. Yeah, they probably did because I know some of them that would have done it to me, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that ranchers are all good, or perfect people, but we have to. And one of the things that actually selling direct to customer does for ranchers, even if they do it on a small scale, like 4 head a year, is helps them have a communication aspect with their consumer. And I think that's probably an extremely important thing because it teaches both sides, right, a little bit about each other.
Sure.
And we're
Yeah.
really lacking in that. Ranchers don't want to know what their customers want. They just want to raise their beef and sell it.
Yeah.
And consumers are all like, well, ranchers are jerks and we don't want to get to know them, or they shouldn't own so much land or whatever it is. But
Hmm. Yeah.
so the two sides are at odds, and that's a hard picture to bring together.
Yeah. It is. I think when you sit down and talk to, the most extreme environmentalist,
Hmm.
you and you let your guard down, you let go of your ego, probably realize you have a lot more in common with them than you do different. Our approach is going to be different.
Hmm.
One of them sees cattle as a solution, the other sees cattle as the problem. How can we fight for the same cause without fighting at each other, without seeing each other as the enemy, and really saying, okay, what we want is to be able to heal the land from an ecological aspect. We want to restore the water cycles. We want to mitigate these extreme weather events. Um, we want to be able to see wildlife populations increase. We can agree that on all those things, that's what we both, because we're both going to benefit from that. Uh,
Right.
so, any suggestions there of how to fight
I
and
I
unite on a common cause rather than fighting against each other and using that energy to destroy rather than build?
I think number one, understand who your friends are and who your enemies are.
Okay.
That's a sometimes a hard picture to get to. And the other thing is don't alienate people who are trying to help you. So I think ranchers, and this is a difficult thing I because I'm not a rancher, right? I get a lot, oh, he doesn't own cows. So, or he's not a real cowboy, whatever. You get that all
Uh-huh.
the time, right? one of the reasons I got into what I'm doing is I don't see a lot of people on social media. In fact, when I talk to ranchers, they're like, "Oh, don't show that on social media. Don't show
Uh-huh.
this. Don't show." I'm like, "We can't actually show what you do because if we don't show it, somebody else will show it and they'll
Right.
explain the opposite." Now, that doesn't mean that you need to show the nastiest, dirtiest stuff that you do, because I think a lot of ranchers show what's happening on their ranch and don't explain it.
Hmm.
And that can be a super negative. Don't just show a bunch of, branding or, castrating calves and not explain what you're actually doing and what the purpose of it is. Because you have to realize the person watching that doesn't know.
Yeah.
So, and if you explain it to them, most people are like, "Oh, wow, really? That's why you do that." They're not
Hmm.
like, "Oh, those dirty." But if you don't explain it, that bawling calf pulls at somebody's heartstrings and they go, "Oh, my word, they're so cruel," right?
Hmm.
So you need people who can take on the mantle of going out there and speaking for you. I think you can do some of it as a rancher, but not most ranchers are not going to do this. I mean, a lot of ranchers I know have a flip phone, right?
Right.
Right. They're not going to be sitting here doing what I'm doing and you're
Um,
doing,
yep.
correct? So we can't expect them to do that. I'm not going to hammer on ranchers. Man, you got to get out there on social media and do whatever. But you need to support and find ways to do that. Most of the organizations that we have for promoting beef are no longer really promoting independent ranchers. They're because the money is all flowing from big corporate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Lobbyists and everybody has that
yeah.
protecting the corporate side, as you mentioned. So, yep.
So it's really you have to know where your friends are, where your enemies are, and you're going to have to try to help those people
Yeah.
get your voice out there and not be afraid of social media, not be afraid of what's happening on it. But I think an understanding we have two. I run into this all the time because people don't really like what I do in many on both sides.
Huh. And
Um,
how come? What's not to
some people
like?
love it, right? Because I'm too real.
Okay.
I'm not like I'm not I could do this. I could just get on my horse and show all the pretty stuff.
Hmm.
If you go on to Instagram, that's what you'll see if you search ranching. A calf sucking on your thumb. I mean, the beautiful scenery, somebody loping across the pasture, somebody homesteading, in a garden. But talking about the actual issue is very difficult. People are like, "Oh, I don't know if you should expose that."
Okay.
Well, if we don't expose it, they're going to take everything. I mean, I took a trip in January. I drove down from Montana to LA. And then I did a series of videos from LA all the way to Oregon.
Uh-huh.
That was an eye opener for me because that's what's coming here.
Hmm.
The independent rancher is sitting between big corporate and environmental activism in agencies and groups,
Hmm.
which lots of money, which is using lawfare. So you're not going to be protected. You're not going to be protected if you're quiet. I heard this a lot. I'm just not going to say anything. I don't want to help. I don't want to promote anything that is really showing what ranch. I'm just going to hide out here. Well, that'll only last for so long until they come for you.
Yep. Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was
Ask the Jews how that worked for them.
exactly it. So I saw there's a place in California, the Cuyama Valley is being, and this is two massive corporations farm in that valley, and they don't even have anything but sheds. There's no infrastructure that they put in place there, right? They just have farms. These are uh, corporate farming that control 85% of the carrot market.
Okay. Uh-huh.
They have sued every single person in the valley, including the school and anybody with an individual well of any kind. They've sued them for their water rights. So
Huh.
they're in the middle of a battle Why is because California has required them to file a water plan, and the water plans are not going to be in favor of these guys just pumping as much water as they possibly can from the ground, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
so they're I don't even know if they want to win, but
Hmm.
they're destroying. Every independent rancher has to hire a lawyer now. Every independent little tiny homestead has to hire a lawyer for thousands of dollars to fight these guys.
Uh-huh.
This is going on at the same time as when you go north to Marin County or Marin County, I can't remember which how you pronounce it,
Uh-huh.
just north of San Francisco, the most beautiful area I have been in. And they're afraid to bring anybody on a dairy farm because
Yeah.
somebody's using somebody's trying to destroy them with environmental impact. They want to just remove them all so that it stays like it looks right now.
Hmm.
I can tell them right now, it won't look like that if you remove the cattle. It looks nice and green and rolling. Well, you'll have just brush and matted old grass and, like I saw down south in
And
California.
wildfires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, it's not rational, but
Yep.
that's what we're facing is those two sides. And it's out there right now, but it's starting to come here. And Colorado is an instance of that.
Yeah.
We see it happening in some places in Montana, even. So,
Yeah. So Trinity, what does the public do? Um, if let's assume that the public wants to really protect the environment and, they truly care about it. What would be your message to them on their side? What action steps can they take to make a difference?
well, I think there's a lot of stuff they can do as far as buying direct, find a rancher that's local and buy from
Yeah.
them. That's one thing. I mean, if you
Yeah.
really want to support these guys, if you go to Walmart, number one, and I say Walmart, but there's all these chain stores are massive corporations anymore. So they're where they get their meat from, you don't even know.
Mhm.
Some of it comes from the
Sure.
United States. It's mixed in with something else from somewhere, who knows where, and how there's not really, we don't even know what they do with it over where they gather this meat. We don't have country of origin labeling, so we don't really know where that meat comes from. If you want to support local ranchers, buy directly from one, and I believe you will not be unhappy with that. Actually, I mean,
Hmm.
the people that I buy meat from, I'm like, it is so different than the meat that I buy in the store.
Hmm.
Anyway, especially with pork, if you can find
Yeah.
somebody who grows pork that's not in a building with you know 30,000 pigs that never see the sun
Yep.
and doesn't have any fat, it is very different buying locally. That's one thing they can do, and really staying abreast of what's going on. It's very difficult for the public right now. Honestly,
Mhm.
they are hearing from the media and from all aspects. They're not really. There's not a lot of places they can get the real news.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that I'm working on that, but I can't find an avenue. I haven't found an avenue that's very easy to reach the public with, even
Okay.
social media, because unless they're looking for it, how are they going to find you, right?
Hmm.
I mean, the way that algorithms work, it doesn't just show it to everybody that doesn't want to see your stuff.
Yeah.
It only shows your stuff to people who actually are wanting to watch something about ag, right?
Uh-huh.
so so that's a difficult thing, but they can search those things out to stay informed about what's going on. Under really, there's a couple documentaries that are really good about cattle and understanding what they do for the planet. In fact, there's a study done by the Smithsonian out in eastern Montana with buffalo, and
Hmm.
another one in Europe on buffalo that show the massive benefits to an ecosystem and the grasses and the soils and all that stuff. Now they're based on buffalo because, as you know, buffalo are good, cows are bad, right? That it's for some
I didn't
reason
know
that works.
that.
Yeah. I don't know how. I mean, I always say, there's this other animal that does almost identical thing. In fact, they're so close together you can actually breed them
Yep.
and
Yep.
get an offspring. And yet they're safe to have around civilization, and you can fence them in.
Uh-huh.
There's that animal. I think we may want to promote that animal as doing the same thing as what your studies do on buffalo.
Yeah.
Um, so those kind of things. Search out those good quality information that actually shows you what cattle do. And as a hunter, man, you know, they need they really we have groups that are closed minded about being together that actually really need to be together because we're being picked apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Very
that
true.
the wolf thing, that is not just against ranchers. That is very
Hmm.
much against ranchers, but that's against hunters as well.
Yeah.
Not that we need to eliminate wolves everywhere all the time, but
Hmm.
that wolves automatically do this magical thing of managing wildlife populations to very specific numbers, and that they just stop and they don't ever kill anything, any livestock. And those are just mythical things that people need to understand, that that's an attack on over rampant numbers of predator populations, and that are an attack on private property and your access to public land. Basically, they're trying to eliminate humans off of public land too.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the other threats that you see or challenges facing the family farmer or rancher? Um, and I'll lead off with one that I see because it's so much in alignment with what we do, and that's profitability.
Yeah.
We just had a virtual summit which you registered for, and that's how I got your contact information.
Mhm.
Appreciate you doing that. Um, that we did a survey, 700 plus people registered, and the number one concern was profitability. So absolutely the economics, and appreciated again your interview with Mike Calicrate, and give a plug for that. Go back and listen to that because um, that aspect is right. We need we need profitability. What other things do you see are the threats, the challenges, and then maybe let's talk about the opportunities for the family size farmer rancher.
Mhm. And I think um, profitability is a major one. It actually leads into a lot of different things. It leads into another issue, which is kids not staying on the farms and ranches that know how to actually manage those things. I think a couple things are happening there. You have if you're not profitable as a rancher, your kids are not going to want to stay very easily because they
Mm-hmm.
watch you be stressed out, how hard you work, how much you put in to this life, and not get the rewards at the same time that they're able to see the rewards that other people get. They may be fake because they're
Yeah,
watching some Instagram person, but to them, they're looking at somebody that's got vacations and, you know, they do fun things, and then they're looking at their parents stressed out to death because they just lost 14 calves to something. And they're like, why would I want to do this? When you try to compare the two in your mind, which comparison is the death of almost anything, right? You're
mm,
comparing your reality to somebody's fake life,
sure.
or
Yep.
what you perceive somebody else to have, and that's never a good outcome there. So I think profitability is a key to all of this. In
Okay.
fact, when you look at the American Prairie Reserve out in eastern Montana, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
Okay, so in eastern Montana, there's a group that it's all donation based that is putting together a 3 million acre prairie reserve. It's actually pretty remarkable. I think it's really cool. They're putting buffalo back on a lot of it. Um, they want to show, we have national parks all over the place, but they're all in mountainous areas. We don't have a prairie reserve, right?
Okay.
Understand all that, right? Understand that that could be a very fantastic thing. They also believe that humans are a part of the ecosystem, so they don't want to eliminate hunting. They actually use hunting for population control of their buffalo. They
Mhm.
actually take in 9,000 cattle on their place from ranchers, lease it to them, because they, at least for at this point, they do not believe that, like a lot of people do, that 150 years ago apparently humans weren't here, or they
Uh-huh.
had zero impact.
Right.
We need to go back to 150 years ago when humans didn't do anything. Well, what do you mean they did? They were covering the plains. So
Yeah.
to think that they had no impact is ridiculous. But anyway, something like that. When you see American Prairie, there's a huge argument about them buying land, because they're buying land from ranchers who are selling to them, obviously, right?
Hmm.
Now, they think that they can outbid people. People have this conception that they can outbid people. Actually, they're a nonprofit, so they can't. They can only pay market value.
Hmm.
But market value is high for anybody who can't make profit on it as a ranch, right? So the real issue is not that these guys are taking over eastern Montana by buying up this land. The issue is we have to make a way for ranchers to make enough money to where they don't sell to people who have the money. That's really the issue. We can try to stop them from buying land, but then you get into who you're going to allow to buy land.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
I believe that's a personal right of somebody in the United States, to private property rights. Then you get into that,
Agreed.
right? Whereas eh, the the underlying problem is profitability.
This is cool. I think we're covered a lot of ground. The number two concern was succession, bringing
Hmm.
the next generation in. Number three was access to land, and those kind of fluctuate. And I've been asking that in the last 4 quarterly summits that we've done. But profitability has always been number one. And here we are, record high commodity prices, and yet we're still concerned about profit. So
Well,
I
here's
agree. There's a lot of
one.
side effects, trickle down effects from that, right? So go ahead.
Well, and we know that here's the issue with profitability in my mind. I really love you guys doing what you're doing, because there's several people around here that do the same thing. They don't talk about it much, but understanding how you can get more out of your property
Mhm.
is a good thing. I think profitability solves the succession problem in many ways. Not always, because there's
Mhm.
families are families. You know
Yeah.
that. Relationships are one of the toughest things. But if you have profitability, very much more likely your kids are going to be able to stay there
Mhm.
and may want to actually do something in the business, right? So that
Yep.
does answer part of that problem. It does may even answer the other problem with access to land, because if you're profitable enough, you would be able to compete for land where you can't right now in many areas, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think profitability is a massive key there. When you say commodity prices are really high,
At least on the livestock side, I know the farmers are, man, it's
yeah,
tough. A
they're
lot
not
of
high.
a lot of them are not able to budget a even a break even this year. So they're going into the year planting knowing that, like, yeah, the government's going to have to pitch in a little bit this year, sometimes a lot. So
Well, and so one of the dangers I see about the high commodity prices on the livestock side, I'm not really, I don't even think they're that high. They seem high
yeah,
compared to what
highest
we
they've
have
ever
had,
been, but yeah,
but the cost of actually producing that same calf has doubled in the last 3 years too. With
absolutely. Yep.
so what the danger that I see in that is, and here's a theory of mine, okay, and I don't know if this is actually true. What I see happening, this is a um, the USDA put a lot of millions and millions of dollars towards small packing plants. So lots of them are getting started right now.
Hmm.
During COVID, the packers made record amounts of profit. So they don't really have to make a massive profit now, because they've tripled or quadrupled their profit in those years.
Okay.
So one tool they have to really hurt the market of these small packing plants is to make them pay more for cattle. So we do tons of our actual selling of cattle is not a free market. It's all contract.
Mm.
So we contract stuff. They go to the sale, and you see the same four guys buying the same cattle at whatever price, and they won't go over that. But they're pushing that price up pretty high. I know the one in eastern Montana, the packing plant out there, said now they have to pay a ton of money. If anything happens, and they have to actually produce a profit off of an animal that the packer can actually break even and still produce a profit on,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
they have the drop.
Mm-hmm.
They've got the hide and all the extra stuff. They can actually make a profit on that. They only hold
Yeah.
the animal for 2 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the risk is not there. They know what they have to put in, what they can put in, and what they can get out. The small packers are going to really, really struggle with this.
Yeah.
They don't have the drop. So if they have to pay that much for cattle, it doesn't take long for them to be out of, they don't have access to the market, and now they have to pay a ton for cattle. Where are they going to sell it at an extreme high price, because they have to split that cost over 100 head
Mhm.
versus 4,000 a day. That's a big difference, you know. So I
Yeah.
see that, intentional or not, that's a huge concern of mine. If the prices are really high now, and I think the I think what tariffs are going to help, I believe. I don't know what your thoughts on that. It's going to help because if they can just flood the market with imported beef to drop the price, now that we're all kind of set on that, and we're now putting that means that the cost of raising the beef is not going to go down, but
Yeah.
what we can get for it is that's going to be big time. So I don't
Yeah.
know. What are your thoughts on this as far as putting money into expanding right now?
As far as herd expansion,
Herd expansion, keeping heifers because the prices are high. We're not really saving heifers over. We're not growing the herd in the United States very much right now.
right? Yeah. Yeah. And so there's definitely, the supply and demand aspect that is driving prices higher. But also, I probably have more questions than answers, Trinity, because uh, to me, it seems unsustainably high from the aspect that when you go to the grocery store and you're on a budget and
Mm.
you see organic, regenerative certified ground beef for $15 a pound, and you see Costco organic for $5 a pound, and you see regular commodity for 3. You're on a budget. What are you going to pick? Man, I really want to feed my family the best, but if we do that, how are we going to make everything else work? So I I don't know. I don't begin to understand what all the factors are that are driving the prices to where they are right now. Um, what we know is the price today. Can it crash? Certainly has before, right? Will it? We have no idea. Maybe we've reached a new plateau. Maybe it will just, the new bottom for a calf is going to be $1,500. But when I took over management in the 1996, I got married, took over management in the late 1990s. I remember the year that we got married, we sold bred broken mouth cows for $300. And when we sold our first calf for $1 a pound, I'm like, we're rich. And that was in the early 1990s. But we weren't. We
No,
weren't. I mean,
it just felt like it.
in the 1970s, they were selling for $1 a pound. So we had just gotten back to that,
Mhm.
20 years of where they could have been, probably should have been for all of our costs and inputs. Especially if you're going to factor in the land cost, the true cost of purchasing the land. Um, so yeah, that I guess kind of back to you on that as the consumer. If you want to support local ranchers, but we are in a recession, maybe headed for a full blown depression. Who knows? Maybe Trump will help turn the tide, but again, we don't know. We know that money is tight. We know that financing is tighter. SBA is not giving out the loans that they used to for small businesses. Hopefully, we don't see hyperinflation. what would you recommend to the consumer that still is an advocate for regenerative agriculture or whatever they value in the agriculture space, but they're living on a budget? If I wouldn't, if it was me, maybe I'd buy pork. Maybe I'd buy chicken. It's a whole lot cheaper right now. So who's to say that won't swap things because there's not going to be the continued demand?
Okay, so one thing, we do get stuck in one aspect, right? We want to raise cows. I think there might be more profit in something like hogs if you're going to sell direct to customer.
Mm-hmm.
They produce a lot of meat in 1 year versus a cow, right, in 30 months.
Yep.
So that is a quite a bit of a difference there. Now, we do, as far as environmental impact, I believe we need the cattle. You got to have one of the big grazers. You got to either have buffalo or cattle on it, right?
Yeah.
How do customers deal with this? Consumers deal with this? That is the real question, because is it worth buying the cheap meat? I think down that road, I think we're headed, if we allow corporate to, when I say corporate, the globalized system of corporate that kind of has control of our food system right now. If we allow that to continue, we won't have a food system, because, and then they'll be able to charge whatever they want, right? We're actually getting to the place where cattle is starting to go the road of hogs and chickens, right? Where we want to actually own cattle. We'll just run cattle for the big corporations. Not a great place to be for any consumer in a city. So they kind of have to ask themselves, where do they want to put their money? Do they want to put their money behind the independent ranchers? And then you're going to have to cut out some of the cheap, horrible stuff that you buy from the grocery store. I mean, it's just the way it is. I mean, you eat cereal is one of the worst. It's just sugar. I mean,
Yeah.
things like that, you're going to have to cut that out and buy some quality meat from somebody. And you don't have to spend a ton. If you go to the grocery store, you may have to, but you may have to learn how to buy a quarter of a beef.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's more economical. It's more upfront, and you have to actually have a way to store it, which most people in a city don't. That's what you got to learn, those kind of things. But that's kind of the way I see it now.
Yeah. 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 And it's a trade-off. I mean, my wife is a big health advocate and speaks out about that. You're going to pay for it one way or the other. Either pay
Oh
for
yeah.
your food, the good fuel to feed your body, or pay for it in disease or medical bills or lack of quality of life on the back end for eating the garbage that we call food that are just empty calories. So
And these systems have to change, but I am like you on that. I don't really have the answer. These local food systems have to come back. How they come back, I'm not positive, because to one of the questions I have for you, okay,
mm-hmm.
is we have profitability in the system
Mm-hmm.
already. It's not going to us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to you, right? It's going to the middlemen. I remember listening to lots of business podcasts saying, if you're going to get into business, don't get in the business of manufacturing, get in the business of the middleman between the manufacturer and the retailer, because that's where the money is made.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with beef. People aren't stupid. They've figured out that the middleman is the one who makes the profit. So when you have a company like Cisco who can make 105% return on equity, for crying out loud, in a year, which last year was $1.9 billion net profit. Wow. There is that profit there. Mm-hmm. How do we get that profit to come back to the cattle producer himself instead of going to the middleman? Do you have any major thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So kind of two parts to that. Doing your due diligence, like you said, and understanding what the job of that middleman is. Everybody wants to be the middleman until they're the middleman and they realize, okay, yeah, they actually do earn, maybe not proportionate right? I do agree there's some discrepancy there as far as the retail dollar that's spent. And what did you say the other day with Mike? It's like 30 cents
Yeah,
of a dollar,
30
30%,
cents now. Used to be
30% goes
60.
back to the producer.
Hmm.
So there's some disparity there, right? When we're taking all
Well,
the risk.
let me let me be clear. 35% of the dollar goes back to the producer, but that 35% includes all the way up to the packer. So that includes the cow calf operation,
The
the
stalker,
backgrounder,
the
and the feedlot.
finisher. Really? Okay.
All of it.
Okay. Not the cow calf guy. So what?
No,
Any idea what the cow calf guy gets? I should.
there's no real number of that, but it's part of 35%. So
Okay.
when 35 cents on the dollar, so that means when a dollar comes in, 35 cents of that has to cover the feeder, the backgrounder, and the cow calf operator.
Yeah.
60% is split between the packer and the retailer.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Okay. I'm glad. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
So back to answering your question, when we do these summits and things, we bring in people from regenerative agriculture, people from other industries, people from even complete outside the industry that talk about health and relationships and all the parts and pieces that make a business work. But one of my colleagues that runs our marketing, she owns multiple businesses, and she looks at ranchers as she's gotten to know us, and she's like, there's no other industry that does what you do, Jared. Why do you work so stinking hard for such a small margin? A lot of times a negative margin. And the only way that we're staying in business is because our land continues to appreciate. The bank gives us a little bit more money. We're just kicking the can down the road and postponing the inevitable. So on the extreme side, it's to take a hard look at your numbers and say, hey, if we can't make it, let's not drive this thing into the dirt. Let's make sure, let's get out while we have some equity, as a good business person would, right? They're not, nobody in Silicon Valley, nobody in other businesses are going to be so passionate about a product that they're going to just say, hey, we're doing good for humanity, so we got to stick with this. Now, that said, what can we do to be able to switch that? And what do I see that other people are doing? Realizing that cattle are just part of what we manage.
Mm-hmm.
What are the other resources that we manage on this land? You mentioned the wildlife. There's the scenic value. Sometimes there are conservation values. Recreation is certainly something. Multi-species. We don't have to be just siloed in a box that we're just cattle ranchers and the cow has to pay for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fact of the matter is it can't. If you're going to go buy a ranch today, pretty much anywhere, and go get bank financing, and you're going to say my cow's going to pay for it, I haven't been able to put together a budget that works for that. Unless you have
you know as well as I do. So, sometimes paper isn't reality, but if you can't make it work on paper,
yeah,
it
yeah,
really isn't going to work in real life.
unless you're coming in with a huge down payment.
Yep.
You've got a partner, you've got somebody else that's investing for other values other than what the grazing, harvesting that forage can do, whether that's with machinery or with cattle. That's where the current economy is right now. So at some point, Wally Olson said, he's seen where the cow can pay for it. Maybe we'll get back to that point, either in, the increased calf prices, cattle prices, or, the land will come back to the value where there's that equilibrium. So there's not a silver bullet. There's not an easy answer, Trinity. What I think it looks like is saying, hey, we're going to look at this as a true business owner. What is a reasonable return on our assets that we want to require out of this business? What are the enterprises that will support and do that? What are the other things that we can do? I'm not suggesting go getting an off-farm job, but sometimes, and I'm not a big proponent of debt either, but sometimes we can leverage what we have and invest in something else that will actually help create passive income for us on the ranch side. And that's currently something that we're doing, with some of the off-farm investments and things we're doing. We're not saying it's propping up the business, but it is helping us as business owners to be able to build wealth and do more of the things that we care about.
Well, it is a sad conversation because, in a way, and I'll share why. Because when you have to have a conversation about the fact that you can't actually make a profit to cover the cost of what your assets that you need to make the business work correct, like the land, which is what the land is.
Yep.
But there's other ways that land can make money besides producing food for us. I believe there has to be, what I'm trying to work on is there has to be a way. Now, actually, most of what I work on is trying to educate people in the cities in a fun way, or maybe in a not so fun way, but however I can get to them, right, with the facts of what producers do for them, so they don't kick you guys out politically.
Yep.
Right. But there has to be ways to spread that dollar. But right now, we don't dictate any of the actual money at the top, right? If there's 105% potential profit on equity for what you produce, then there has to be a way to profit on that and keep it and create local systems that actually give more back to the producer.
Yeah.
Because as a rancher, selling direct to customer is not the end answer, because there's not enough access to that. There's not, especially you look at Montana, you got 1 million people, right? You got 1 million cows. You're not going to sell. That doesn't work. The math doesn't even work, right?
Yep.
So it's not actually feasible. I think it's feasible for local systems to be put in place, though, that actually can give back to those ranchers more profit. And there has to be a way for those places to be profitable when there's that much profit in the market somewhere. I don't think that's the answer to your issue, because you as a rancher have to figure out how to make it from here to there. So what, are you going to wait for somebody to come up with a system? I mean, we used to have systems like that all over. Everything used to be regional and local. When something like COVID happened in the 60s, if that would have happened in the 60s, all the communities out where I live wouldn't have even noticed, because everything was basically distributed within, they had butcher shops, they had, the farm products, they had beets, they had potatoes, they had everything that coming in locally. Everybody had, 12 cows that they milked. So we wouldn't have noticed any loss of any. We had a flour mill, right? Now, when everything goes through the central system, that's really our enemy right now, is the fact that everything is so centralized that we don't have, well, and it's actually dangerous to our entire food supply. But
it is,
because if anything happens to any one of those channels, we're now at the end of the food supply chain. It all leaves here and comes back. So if anything happens at one place, it like wipes out half the nation instead of where everybody's kind of self-sustaining.
Yeah.
So
it's a complex issue for sure.
It is very complex,
and there's not one easy answer. Probably not going to change it. Probably not in a decade, but it's good to see. It's good to see that the wheels are turning. Like most changes, Trinity, you've probably seen this. Moses never entered the promised land.
He never got to see that.
It takes a generation die off for things to truly evolve. And so that's my hope, and that's what I see is this kind of this perfect storm right now, where we've got an aging population in agriculture, farming and ranching, which is transitioning out. We have something like COVID to kind of shake things up and say, hey, there's some fragility in this system. We have a lot of now scientific data that all food is not created equal. Very soon we will be able to substantiate what nutrient density actually means and not just claim, hey, my food's more nutrient dense.
Right.
You'll be able
Right.
to see, okay, this package of beef versus this package of beef, which one's actually got more nutritional value, more vitamins, more minerals.
Right.
And so at this, I think we can go one of two ways, right? We can either go towards further consolidation, where this retiring generation, they don't have anybody to pass it on to. But the good thing is that there's this younger generation, and we're going to talk about this in our podcast on Thursday, the live one that we do with a professor from he teaches ranch management at BYU Idaho and in Rexburg, Idaho. And so he's going to come at it from the perspective of what the young people need to thrive. We have this younger generation that loves agriculture, that wants to get back to the land, the homesteading. Not everybody can do it at a ranching scale, but yet they want. There's some genuine desires, and I believe even God-given callings that people want to come back to the land now and want something that's real.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I see where you and I can help in raising our voices. Like, okay, let's not go down that path. That path actually leads to servitude, meaning that we're going to consolidate things further. It might be more efficient. It might be more profitable
It's
for some
not.
people.
It might be more profitable for a few. So here's one thing I've discovered. And so I used to say exactly that it might be more, and then I really thought, wait, I better just figure out what I'm saying there.
Okay.
Efficiency means that you lose less on the way to the top.
Mm-hmm.
So if you mean when I say efficiency, yes, it's more efficient in moving our dollars from all of our little communities to the top of one corporation without losing or spending more on the way up.
Yep.
So if that, I'm completely against that type of efficiency in this case.
And
Because no wonder our small communities are dying. All of our money leaves our community.
yeah,
Right?
and to that point too, it's efficient in creating calories. It's
Right.
it's not efficient in creating health. It's not efficient
Yes.
in creating nutrient density. And therefore it's not efficient in quality of life, and I believe therefore it's not necessarily the system that will lead towards further freedom.
Yes.
I think it's actually leading away from it.
And so one thing I will say, what I have kind of tried to do is I'm trying to figure out ways to change the perception, because I think we're fighting not only the economics, but we're fighting the perception. Most people get this view of what ranchers do, and it's wrong. So that's kind of why it's kind of why I say ranchers, it's good for them to have customers, even if it's a few, because they actually begin to understand what they're dealing with, right?
yeah,
That they may have to open up a dialogue there a little bit, but also my job is to get the actual reality of how things work to the person in the city, because I don't think schools are doing that.
yeah,
So my son showed me this game. It's called Heyday.
okay.
Okay. And he said, here's how you harvest bacon. They string the pig up, they squeeze bacon out, and then they release a skinny pig. I'm
Okay.
like, this is one of the major reasons why we have a misconception of farming. If you actually don't put that together in your head and you play something like this, we don't realize what we're learning by what
Yeah,
we play. That teaches, well, why are these ranchers killing things? We don't have to kill things. And it's mean to kill things, but we want bacon, right?
yeah,
So to help that reality, I'm doing things like I created a cattle game where you can raise cattle. It's called Cattle Kings.
cool.
Yeah, but I put all the genetics in there. I more like teaching the business aspects of how you can raise cattle for profit.
Okay.
So I changing the economy to make it harder for you. Making it difficult to make a profit on certain types of cattle. Not having too many bulls or they wreck your corral. kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a huge aspect there that we have to get to the people an actual understanding of what the reality is out here. Because when they
Yeah.
come out here, they don't have that reality.
Hmm.
And if they don't have that reality, we're that inevitability of big corporate control and everything because it's more efficient. That is being sold to us every single day. They can do a better job. They can do a better job. And then when you
Yeah.
go out to California and you see big corporate extracting as much as they possibly can, they don't care about the environment because it's very easy to sit in a boardroom and vote something into existence for an extra 3% profit. Not even worrying. We just have to comply with all these regulations, but the lawyers can take care of that.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas the actual guy that's got to sit there on his property and and say, I want to stay here for 40 years, so therefore I have to take care of this property is a
Uh-huh.
completely that's the picture we have to help people understand. I was sitting talking with Kevin Costner
Hi.
in January. He said something to me that really struck me as profound, not that he meant it in the way that I took it, but he said the people that crossed the West weren't risk takers. They didn't often sit there and admire a sunrise. He said a goal in mind and they had so much work to survive. They weren't actually able to even enjoy what they were seeing.
Hmm.
I think that's a lot of times what we're having in ranching now. We need to bring back the realization to ranchers of what they actually have. That hard work, even though if we can take out some of the stress, that would really help. But being able to see what you actually get to do, what benefits that has to you to work hard, to work with your hands in a physical thing that gives you back feedback every time you do something right and every time you do something wrong.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
we can help ranchers to actually enjoy and see the enjoyment, take the time to see the enjoyment they're doing,
Hmm.
it's going to benefit us. So that education and time. I mean, what you're doing and what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Well, man, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. Sorry,
This has been
I
a
could go
no.
on.
I think we'll just do a round two.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot more to talk about, and I appreciate we can come from both the producer side, meaning the rancher.
Hmm.
Most of our listeners are probably more on the rancher side or farmers with a livestock component, but we do have some row crop farmers and a lot of homesteaders that listen to our podcast. We're really clear at Ag Steward, the people that we serve um, in our consulting and coaching are the people that are doing it for business, doing it
Hmm.
at scale. But we get people that listen from any aspect of it. Generally, they're committed to regeneration and to stewardship and coming at it from a godly perspective. But so just to wrap things up here for this session, Trinity, um, I really appreciate you taking time. Thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate the voice that you are. I know how hard it is to continue to put yourself out there. Sometimes, the temptation for me, I don't know if it's for you too, but just like, hey, just go back to ranching, Jared. Just go hide, go back and build houses. Like when
Uh-huh.
you raise a voice of truth, the opposition is fierce and intense, and probably even the haters come out of the woodworks and start to tear you down. And so it's not for the weak-hearted. I mean, it's a labor of love. But how can people support what you do? What's the best way to support your cause and your efforts, Trinity?
Well, I think they can find out everything they need to know at lifeinthewest.com.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I've started a community there, and I talk about the game that I started to help promote. A lot of people aren't gamers, but I'm not a gamer. But a
Yeah.
lot of people like that aspect of learning how to raise cattle, the realities of how it works, that kind of thing. Uh, and I have a community that you can get involved in about how to see where to buy local beef, where to support ranchers, what parts to do that. So if they go to lifeinthewest.com, they can get that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, encourage that. Support that, and subscribe to his channels, whatever. Are you on Instagram also?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube.
okay.
I find they're not the same audience. So people
Interesting.
that
Okay.
like to, have one particular, a lot of people gravitate towards one app or the other. So
Mhm.
Instagram people don't really technically, and that is something I will tell you. If you want to take the time to jump over to a different platform and create content for two, some people think, well, I can't put the same content in two places. But you can, because it's definitely not the same audience. If you just watch people with their phones, some people will gravitate towards they just watch YouTube,
Okay.
right? Some people gravitate towards they just open up Instagram. Some people open up TikTok, but rarely do they open up TikTok and then they go to Instagram and then they just don't do that. They consume
Kind of.
on pretty much one app. So
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Mhm.
Good to know. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think this has been inspiring. It's been great. Encourage our listeners to tune back into both what we do at Ag Steward and the Profitable Steward podcast and what Trinity does on his side. I think there's a lot of synergy there between what we do. And
absolutely. Hmm.
so,
Very important what you do.
well, thank you.
And
Yeah, we want to keep family farmers and ranchers on the land by helping them be profitable and create legacy businesses,
right.
so that next generation has a place to come back and wants to. And it's that's our mission, and that's really clear.
Well, so as hard as this is, I'm gonna end with this. I'm sorry, I gotta help out.
Please do.
So, family farms and ranches, as frustrating as they are and stressful as they are, it's always. I think in our society, we want to make everything smooth, right? We want to make our lives smooth as possible, but it's always the things that went wrong that make a memory, right?
Yep.
Who doesn't want to have some stories in their life? So if you're my grandpa had he was in Conrad and he was going to sell he was going to sell 22 hogs that he had grown, and he was going to drive them down 60 miles to Great Falls to do this and just sell them at the auction thing. So he's got this old grain truck, he puts them in, and if you know those old grain trucks, they were terrible to haul down the highway, right?
Uh-huh.
Blizzard, it was below zero and a blizzard. He drives the 60 miles, unloads the hogs, and while he's unloading the hogs, they get a call in the shoot house, and the guy comes out and says, "Hey, there's a hog running loose in Dutton, like 30 miles. Are you missing any?" And he knows he had 22. So he counts 20, 21, or 20, 21. Nope, I got them all, he says. He wasn't going to go back there and chase down that hog in the blizzard. So
Yeah,
those kind of
yeah,
stories of family things that happen to you, I mean, that survived a lot of years. It wasn't a
yeah.
great story, but now it is,
You're
right?
right. Right. We've all had those. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Sometimes it's the biggest wrecks that are like, yeah, those are the things that you remember. And so, well, cool. Well, again, thank you, Trinity, and everybody. Thanks for listening in. We'll catch you on our next one.